welcome back to my channel. My name is Rachel, that is the R in the RK Stumbling Bear, and I am a reader and a writer. It's been a while since I have sat down to do this. It was a lot of forums at the end of September, beginning of October, but those are now all done. And so I'm back to let you know what I read in the last 2 weeks of September. I'm only going to do my reading this time because I really don't remember for writing or TV watching. But how I'm going to do this today is I'm going to talk about the 2 novels I read, and then I'm going to talk about the manga. So then if you're not a manga person, you're welcome to bow out at that time. The first thing I finished at the end of September was Babel by R.F. Kuang. I was buddy reading this with Margaret Bernard, and we scheduled a live show to talk about this, which I will link up in the cards. An interesting thing about Babel is I feel like it was a booktube darling when it came out. And not just in booktube. Like, when it first came out, it took me months to get it from the library. And then I had such a short time to read it, I wasn't able to read all of it. Ended up seeing on Book of the Month, it was one of the books offered for $5 around Christmas last year, and I went, oh yes, I will buy that book for $5, knowing that I wanted to get back to it and wanted to read it. So this is a book that I really did love, but it wasn't perfect. I do have issues with it. In Babel, we are following Robin Swift, who is half Chinese, half British. He figures out that he is half British from comments that other people make. And he figures out who his dad is, but his dad, who is Professor Lovell, never acknowledges this to him. He first meets Professor Lovell when he comes and saves him from a disease outbreak in Canton, China. This is in the 1800s. And then he's given the opportunity to return with him to England to study languages in order to go to Babel, this college. Now this is a historical alternate world reality wherein at this time period in our world where we were having the Industrial Revolution, they're having what they call a silver Industrial Revolution because they use silver bars etched with language, 2 words from different languages, and that makes magic. And it's the gap in between the translation that powers things. It's a very cool concept, and it is explained very well in the book. I'm not explaining it well right now. But it was that concept of the magic system and just even translation that really hooked me as I started this book. Because for my job, I have to speak Spanish, and there's so many times when I'm trying to interpret that what is being said in Spanish does not have a very good translation in English, or the concept doesn't have a direct translation, and vice versa. It's because of my experience with language that I was able to relate to all the translation parts of this book, especially where they are talking about trying to connect words from different languages together. I also really loved the etymology, finding out how the word nice came to being really has changed how often I use that word or in what context I use it. It's always interesting to find out words that we use nowadays, when they first started, did not mean what we use them for today. So it's just interesting how languages shift. So we follow Robin as he is preparing to go to Babel, and then when he starts at the college. He meets his cohort, which is made up of Raimi, who is from India, Letty, who I think is from Liverpool. She is British, and then I was saying Victory, but I'm not certain. It's a French name, and she's originally from Haiti, but then grew up in France. It was very much coming to meet these four characters as they come together was very much kind of like a found family, and how you will create a found family based off of the shared experiences that you guys have together. And I loved how Kwong wrote these four, because while they very much complement each other, they very much contradict each other as well. They are complicated characters, and Kwong wrote each of the four of them with such nuance that in the end, even though you're going to have very strong feelings about all the characters, at the same time, you can't actually hate any of them. And you can't actually love any of them either. At least that was my experience, because they're complicated and they're messy and they have goodness and they have vice. And really, all of the background characters are the same way. You don't have one character that is just one character trait. This book also has huge anti-colonialism, anti-empire themes, which match the time that this is being written in with the history of what's going on. That's why I say it's an alternate history, but it's still very much a historical history as well, because it does take a lot of the history that is in our real world and just small things retweet for this world. And so as Robin is at Babel, he does come in contact with a group called the Hermes Society that is trying to balance power throughout the world, whereas the British Empire is at its height, it's at its strength, and at this time they are working to even the playing field, sort of thing. And then Robin has to decide, well, one, does he believe in what they're doing? Two, how much of a part does he want in this? And I thought this was a beautiful place where you get to see the juxtaposition of, as long as my life is not rocked, I'm willing to advocate and do something. But if it's going to affect my stability, then I don't want a part of it, which is a very common, like, human nature way to think of things that we see played out daily in our society. And I love that Kwong just pretty much, bam, in your face, let's face this head on. And Robin is self-aware enough to admit that I enjoy these comforts and I don't want to give them up for this society. But at the same time, I don't agree with all the people who are giving me the comforts. It's a balance. Very much competing values. I'm going to talk about my biggest issue, and I'm going to put a spoiler tag up because it is referencing how the book ends. But it was something that really, really bugged me, so I want to say, hey. So if you don't want to be spoiled for the ending, just skip past when the spoiler tag is no longer there. So the biggest issue I had with this book was how suicide was approached. So Kwong's characters very much have the mindsets of the 1800s, and there were a lot of suicide shaming language going on, especially even before the point where Robin was considering, or before Robin really started having suicidal ideation, he would be accused of wanting to kill himself or wanting to take the easy way out, which is what kind of started triggering me, going, wait, this is shaming for someone having suicidal ideation, but he wasn't having suicidal ideation at that time. And how it was handled, I felt, was very triggering and not nuanced. Out of everything else Kwong wrote, everything else was very nuanced until we got to this part. And I felt like this was just heavy-handed, like, oh, I need to foreshadow what is going to happen at the end of the book. But the way it was done was like strong-arming it into like the conversations. So Raimi accuses Robin early on about wanting to take the easy way out before he finds out about the Hermes Society. Sorry, before Raimi finds out about the Hermes Society, just from casual conversation with Robin. And you know, Robin at this point is living his best life. He's not having suicidal ideation. And then it kind of continues with both Raimi and Victory as things start ramping up. And then especially when those two do find out about the Hermes Society and they're all in, and Robin's like, whoa, I don't think you guys know exactly what you're getting involved with, leading up to the very end when Victory even tells Robin, you know, this is the coward's way out. And he's like, yeah, it is. And then, but that doesn't change that he sees that he needs to die in order to break the tower. And I don't think that the character of Robin needed to have suicidal ideation in order to get him to the place where he would say, oh, I need to sacrifice my life by bringing down the tower. We do have moments of depression from Robin earlier on in the book, but depression does not necessarily lead to suicidal ideation. So I'm probably not explaining this very well at all. And you're welcome to disagree with me. And if you do, please let me know down below. But that was like my one big qualm. That is actually kind of what made, when, like, I was reading this book fairly quickly. And then I started getting these shaming moments. And that was making it hard for me to pick the book back up. And I've needed to take time to really process and think about why that was. So I did not mention this in my chat with Margaret and Lisa. Also because it is a spoiler and our conversation was spoiler free in the spoiler section. So despite that one thing that I didn't like about the book, everything else worked really well, and I know that this is a book that I will reread in the future. So I'm glad that I own it. So the next novel I'm going to talk about is, more lighthearted, because after reading Babel, I needed things that were light. And that was Rivers of London by Ben Arovich. This is the first novel in the Rivers of London series that has been nominated for Best Series in the Hugos, which is why it was on my shelf. It's an urban fantasy, which I knew would take me completely in a different direction. And this is about a police officer, I'm blanking on his name right now, who is at the very beginning of his career, and he ends up meeting a ghost and discovering the paranormal world that is happening in London through the course and duties of his job. And this discovery gains him the attention of an officer who works the paranormal cases, which saves him from a life of paperwork, which is where he was going to be put after his probation period. So he's happy to be in the field and not doing lots of paperwork, but he's now also in over his head as he learns about all the other things that are happening that he never knew. Yeah, so he is brought on to help solve a murder mystery that is very unusual. Like, the CCTV didn't see the culprit. One moment, like, a person had their head, the next they didn't. Yeah, very bizarre murder. which then leads to another very bizarre murder and another one. And our main character is just going throughout the city with his new partner, kind of, getting the lay of the land and, again, learning about the forces that are there. I felt like this was very reminiscent of Jim Butcher's Dresden Files. One, because the main character very much notices the female sex a lot. But, where it's not the same as Dresden is the main character isn't trying to save all the women around him. He recognizes that they have their own unique strengths and they can also kick ass. So that's a nice balance. And I don't think I really want to talk more about the synopsis because that kind of just, I think, yeah. I think this is a fun one to go into blind because that's what happened. Like I said, I picked it up only because it was a nomination, knew nothing about it, and I was very happily pleased with it. And definitely want to continue with the series to see where it's going to go. So, going into the manga that I read, I continued reading Komi Can't Communicate, volumes 7 and 8. This series is a story about a young woman named Komi who has an anxiety disorder that is so severe that she doesn't talk to people. But she's also very beautiful, and so a lot of people excuse it. They don't think that she's actually being rude. They're just like, oh, of course, I'm not good enough, or, oh, here, let me do things for you, but then they're not actually trying to communicate with her. One of her classmates figures it out, and he, asks her, and they end up becoming friends, and then she reveals to him that she really wants, her high school goal is to have 100 friends, so then he helps her connect with her classmates, all while she still has this anxiety disorder that means that she is not comfortable talking. And volume 7 and 8 is more just like fun, like vignettes as she meets more of her classmates and makes more friends, and also has more experiences. I mean, she's lucky that she has her male friend, which I'm forgetting his name at the moment, and then there's another friend who's transgender, I think, who's extremely outgoing and is very good at like planning and getting everyone pulled in. So, and then I read Horimiya volume 3 and 4, and this was a manga series that I picked up after watching the anime. And so I've watched season 1 and season 2 of the anime now, and season 1 is very linear, starts when they meet, goes to, I think, Christmas time. Season 2, I felt like was them going back and forth and pulling out stories that they didn't cover in season 1, so it felt more chaotic and jumping around. And so as I'm reading the manga now, it's putting things into order, and I'm like, oh, see, yeah, here it makes sense in the manga, where it happened in the TV show it didn't make sense. 3 and 4 is more about Hori and Miyamura developing their relationship as they're getting close, like they're friends, and they might like each other, but neither of them are at that point yet where they want to say anything. So actually in volume 4, it does come to a head where they tell each other that they like each other and they agree to start dating. It's really just like a slice of life. It's heartwarming, wholesome, and you get to see the family connections. All of Hori's family, her parents and her brother, are very much present in this book, and so you get to see that with the friendships. It's just a great fun series. Then I read volume 2 of So Cute It Hurts, and this is kind of continuing a story where twins, boy and girl, switch places, go to each other's school, and then end up falling in love with a classmate at that other school. And in volume 2 is kind of when they find out that the people that they are in love with are also siblings. and one of the siblings finds out that the twins had switched. The other one doesn't know, or hasn't found out yet. So, yeah. It's cute. It's very much supposed to be silly, but that's exactly what I was needing. So, that has been my reading wrap up for the last 2 weeks of September.